Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pitts, Ukraine War news update for the 3rd of November 2023. Work out where you are, what day it is and what the hell you're doing. Right, what am I doing? So we're going to look first at the Ukraine General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them below in the description to this video. This is another difficult day for the Russians that we've seen a lot of over the last few months. Although the Ukrainians appear to have ground to a halt in terms of taking territory in their counteroffensive, they haven't stopped attriting the Russians apparently at a hugely debilitating rate for the Russians. So 850 personnel is a big loss for the Russians. Again, 24 tanks, huge, 24 APVs, armored personnel vehicles of all types, 36 artillery systems and 4 multiple launch rocket systems. These are huge numbers again. They are taking big losses. You might think, right, okay, what story is this telling? Why is this happening? I mean, the story it tells is that it's likely that the Russians are still attacking somewhere. For them to take the losses in terms of tanks and APVs, that's usually not from the Ukrainians attacking. It can be, but it's more often recently from Russians attacking. So Avdiivka, they have taken massive losses by throwing mechanized equipment at the Ukrainian lines. Here, you'll find out soon that there are several other hot points. Vuhledar has opened up again, and the Russians have lost a huge amount of equipment there in the last 24 hours again, as well as Avdiivka, as well as other places, even like Krinky. There's some APVs that have been lost by the Russians as they tried to storm that Ukrainian foothold. Then we see 7 drones and 2 cruise missiles. That's not from last night, the night before. 33 vehicles and fuel tanks. It's heavy loss to the Russian logistics and 2 pieces of special equipment. Okay, let's try and see if we can justify these general staff figures. We looked at Andrew Perpetu, says, here are the losses I could identify today. There will be more to come as the Russian losses in Vuhledar are better documented in the coming days. And this is, I mean, there are quite a few Ukrainian losses, but the Russian losses are staggering, as you can see there. So that's about a 3-to-1 loss ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses. Let's look at the Ukrainian losses first, just to see if they have lost anything of particularly high value. There's a number of IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, that are mainly BMP-1s, the oldest sort of Soviet-era infantry fighting vehicles. I don't know what that signifies, but there is a Bradley thrown in there as well. As you can see, these are all taken out by FPV drones. We have a boat taken out by an ATGM and a tank taken out by a mine, an unknown tank by the looks of it. But essentially, most things are taken out by FPV drones, as per usual. That includes a Lancet here for a Hummer, truck, a loaf, and something unknown. So not crazy high value. There is a BM-21 Grad, so that's a multiple launch rocket system, and a Bradley. But let's have a look now at the Russian losses. A Strela-10 air defense system, an 2 electronic warfare systems. We know that the Ukrainians are really going to be aiming for that, just judging on what both Zelensky has said in terms of electronic warfare, but also other spokespeople have said over the last few months that electronic warfare is the #1 priority for targeting for the Ukrainians. So that kind of supports that. There's a boat here for the Russians as well. Some artillery. It's a spread of artillery there. Mr. S, I guess, is fairly long range. Artillery and self-propelled mortars there. So then we come down to tanks, and a lot of tanks on this list. A real spread of T-72s, T-80s, of different variations, and 3 unknown tanks, and then a lot of IFVs. So BMP-2s, not as old as a BMP-1, but not particularly new, and that's mainstay of what the Russians use are these BMP-1s and 2s and 3s as well. BTR there, infantry fighting vehicle. just a lot of those taken out. What are the main cause of destruction for these? Well, if we look down the list of tanks and IFVs, although there are a lot of unknown causes because you just see them blown up, you don't know what's done them in. There are a lot of first-person view drones here, and drones that drop IEDs too. So, and then coming down to the trucks, that's all FPV drones, and coming down to civilian vehicles, that's all FPV drones. When I'm talking about the importance of FPV drones, I think these are genuine game changers. In the way that Perun described in his video from the other week, he didn't include FPV drones. They're not as kind of a bigger category as, say, or a bigger thing, bigger individual thing as, say, the ATACMS or HIMARS. But as a category of weapon, I think they have changed the game since they have been introduced, and they are now becoming the single biggest threat to any bit of equipment. And Zaluzhny, in his chat yesterday, well, in his Economist article and essay, has pretty much indicated that there is this kind of stupor, this stalemate, if you like, because no one can move for the threat of drones raining all hell down on them. So that is a significant list of losses again for the Russians. The Ukrainians have lost some things as well, but the Russians are losing equipment hand over fist there. Right, Richard Vereka from War Spotting says Russia's lost 102 tanks in October. That were visually confirmed by War Spotting. The real number will be a lot more, and is more than any month since February, when 106 tanks were destroyed. I expect more October photos to be added in the next week, so it may turn out to be the most this year. In this graph and data table, you can see how that breaks down by type of tank, and the big trend, which is that the T-80 is now becoming very rare. And I showed you this graph recently that indicates that the T-80 is taking up less of a share of losses than it has done, although there are periods previously when that was also the case. But it seems like the T-72 is the main tank in terms of losses, certainly in October. And you can look at data tables if you want to pause and check that out in terms of tank losses by type over time. Right, we're now going to look, I'm not going to play you these videos, but we're going to look at a few sources talking about the Vuhledar activities from yesterday. Russians are seriously Vuhledaring again, says OSINT Technical. That's an interesting verb. Seen here losing at least, not an accurate count, as there are piles of burning Russian armor, 4 BMPs and 3 T-72s, to accurate Ukrainian fire from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade immediately after assaulting eastern Mikilska. Now, the 72nd has been there for a long time, doing basically what they're doing here, which is destroying Russian equipment with accurate artillery fire. They also lay down an awful lot of mines remotely. The ram shells are something they've been using a lot, and there have been sappers there as well laying mines. This morning, Russians made attempts on the Vuhledar front, says Special Kherson Cat. It is said that at least 10 pieces of Russian equipment were destroyed. Actually, more than that now, it appears. So as the information was coming through yesterday, just lots of video footage showing destruction of vehicles. Getty now says, in the morning, the Russians attacked Vuhledar, which the president talked about. So Zelensky mentioned this yesterday in his speech, but the 72nd Brigade nipped the assault in the bud. As a result, at least 18 pieces of equipment, part of which can be seen in this video, and a lot of manpower were hit. So it just looks like the definition of an insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. It's not just that Avdiivka has just shown this to be an expensive method, but they've done this in Vuhledar time and time again previously. I don't get it. Military Lab says Russia's massive armoured convoys suffer another heavy defeat. According to Ukrainian source Deep State, Russians attacked near the town of Mikilska with large armoured convoys. The 72nd Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian army stopped the Russian attack, inflicting the heavy losses, 18 pieces, including 8 tanks and 3 MTLBs that can be seen in various bits of footage, if you care to look at that. And then when we go to crinky now. On the Dnipro River, we've got 3 armored vehicles tried to storm Ukrainian positions on the east bank of the Dnipro River, and they met their demise. So we got evidence of more equipment losses, but now in a different place. So bad day at the office for the Russians. A few things to concern ourselves with Ukrainian losses, although it's difficult to work out exactly what was lost here. This footage allegedly shows M2 Bradley IFV, so a couple of Bradleys being destroyed by Russian motorized riflemen west of Krasnohorivka and near the coke plant. And I indicated that took place and showed you where on the map. Although it says allegedly, I think that's pretty much confirmed that they've lost some Bradleys there, and indeed at least one Leopard 2 tank. So that itself indicates that the Ukrainians have moved some of their forces from the southern front line up to Avdiivka to prevent further gains for the Russians. But I think it is difficult in Avdiivka for the Ukrainians at the moment. It's not all destruction of Russian, or there's a lot of destruction of Russian vehicles and troops, but the Russians are also piling on a lot of pressure for the Ukrainians there. And then this is now some evidence coming out of losses at the air base near Mykolaiv, the Kulpakino air base. This is one of those incidences, well, several incidences here where it's incredibly frustrating. It's like, one, what are you doing keeping your jets, your active jets, so close to the front line? And 2, what are you doing allowing Lancet drones to hit those jets whilst also having spotter drones above? Like above your airbase? Just goodness me, what air defense doing? The wreckage of one of the MiG-29 fighter jets reportedly destroyed as a result of the Russian strikes, presumably Azala Lancet loitering munition, in September of this year. And then we can look at further images. So heavy watermark warning. The second destroyed Ukrainian MiG-29 jet at the Kulpakino airbase in Mykolaiv Oblast in Ukraine as a result of Russian airstrikes earlier this autumn. So you can see that, but it is not just the fact that you can see destroyed planes, and they are not decoy planes in this instance, but it's a fact that you can see that they are loaded. So in the third Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet at the airbase destroyed as a result of Russian strikes earlier. I believe that this is the one seen in the video below. But I won't show you that video. Well, you've seen the video before. Now, what's interesting for me is this. Notice that 2 of the 3 destroyed MiG-29s had R-27 surface-to-air missiles attached under, air-to-air missiles attached under the wings, while in the third case, such missile is visible next to the fighter jets, indicating that all 3 airframes were operational. But this is, a really big loss, and it did cause some consternation at the time, if you remember, with having jets in their aprons just being taken out by low-value drones being allowed to operate with impunity around a really high-value airbase. I mean, what's going on there? Right, talking about distant strikes, Tim White mentions that last night was a pretty heavy night for the Ukrainians. It was a pretty bad night in terms of drone attacks, because some almost 40 drones were sent, and we're starting to see the evidence that Russia might be stockpiling and are looking at sending waves of both drones and cruise missiles. So although there are no huge numbers of cruise missiles last night, we are seeing an uptick of drones. So they launched almost 40 drones in the evening and overnight in one of the longest sustained attacks of the entire war. Only 24 of 38 attack drones plus 1 missile were downed. So that is not a great interception rate, and there are 14 that got through of 38. Air defense seemingly finding it more difficult to hit modified drones, says Tim White. I don't know what the evidence is that these were modified drones, but an interesting claim there. Now, the state emergency services have shared footage of the consequences of the drone strikes. This is Kharkiv region, where 5 fires were extinguished during the night. No casualties, but some pretty serious fires going on there. But actually, the worst affected area wasn't just Kharkiv, it was Lviv. Now, that's significant because Lviv is the other side of Ukraine. So if you are if Russian drones are able, slow, low-tech drones able to cross the entirety of Ukraine to hit Lviv successfully, then that is still an issue. These drones are still presenting themselves as an issue to the Ukrainians. In the former being Kharkiv, police have released this video taken shortly after strikes by such drones. 8 residents needed medical help, but mainly for shock and stress. No one seriously hurt. 10 drones fired at the city of Kharkiv. Among the places hit were a building for people displaced from the territory occupied by Russia, an educational building, a private house, service station, garages, and cars were damaged by fire. So you often see this, which is the Ukrainians declaring that no military targets are here and they're all kind of residential. While that may be the case, that there is evidence that shows that there were residential buildings hit, we don't know that there weren't military targets hit as well. In the west of Ukraine, 16 drones flew over Lviv, with 11 shot down, but still 5 hits to a critical infrastructure facility in the Lviv region. So I don't know what that facility was, whether it's energy or some other facility, but local leaders say there were no injuries and a fire was quickly extinguished. But that's 5 drones out of 16. That's almost a third of the drones able to get through air defenses all the way to Lviv. That is a serious challenge for the Ukrainians going forward, especially when there are these expectations there are going to be huge waves coming soon. Russian mass drone attack against Ukraine hits infrastructure and civilian sites overnight, says the Kyiv Independent. It doesn't say too much else other than Odessa added in there. So Kharkiv, Ivano-Frankivsk, Lviv, and Odessa, 4 areas seemingly hit. Lots of footage of firefighters doing their stuff. Unconfirmed reports of a possible explosion in Crimea yesterday, says Tim White, in the Jankoy area, where there is an airbase, there's a logistics hub, there's a military base and repair facilities. That is and also training. So I suspect it's training or disposal of some kind. Not sure what that means, whether the weapon is training During the night, occupiers claim they downed 6 drones attacking the peninsula. So Ukraine are still firing their drones and missiles at Crimea, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But first, here is some evidence of daytime launches of ATACMS. So we saw the ATACMS that were launched at thought I'd play you that sound. At Berdyansk and Luhansk air bases, we saw those 5 released, but this is footage now of daytime firing of ATACMS. So they are being used. We're just not hearing an awful lot about them. And you might question whether that's because they're being taken out by Russian air defenses. That's highly unlikely, given that they use inertial guidance, which is not as accurate as GPS, but still pretty accurate, which should give a circle error probable, 5 to 10 meters for the ATACMS, but they're cluster munitions anyway, so you don't need as much accuracy as, say, a unitary warhead with GPS that would give 1 to 2 meter accuracy. But because they don't have GPS, they're less likely to be jammed by the Russians. Now, there are claims from the Russians that they are shooting them out of the sky with their Air Force. Now, here is Rebar, effectively. I mean, this is another source quoting Rebar, making some big claims yesterday about missiles being shot out of the air by Russian air defense, but air defense as in aviation. So Rebar on the AFU missile strikes yesterday, so this would have been possibly 2 days ago now. So this was a tweet from yesterday talking about the day before. So the claims were that a bunch of Storm Shadow missiles were shot down. Storm Shadow strike against Dnipro Group headquarters, and Crimea, Neptune strike against Black Sea Fleet targets. So Neptunes are the indigenous missiles that the Ukrainians have created. Quote, the effectiveness of both the MiG-31 and S-400 in conjunction with an A-50 is proving increasingly effective. So this is the idea that they have radar planes, the A-50, so AWACS planes up in the air, helping to identify and acquire targets for air defense and the Air Force to take out, repelling a missile attack on Crimea and suppressing Ukrainian aviation. Of course, take this with a pinch of salt. This is Rebar claiming, as it turned out, the morning attempt to strike Crimea with Neptune anti-ship missiles and the subsequent attack on Stelkovoi were not the only ones that day. Almost at the same time as a missile raid on the Kherson region, the Ukrainian armed forces again tried to hit Sevastopol with 3 Neptunes in the period from 11:10 to 12:04, bringing the total number to 5 that day. Apparently, the anti-ship complex was planned to strike Black Sea Fleet ships and ammunition depots. All missiles were destroyed by Su-27 SM and Su-27P naval aviation fighters 40 to 90 kilometers northwest of Sevastopol. So the idea is that the Russians have airframes operating in this area. And ideally, the Ukrainians would have on these rigs some kind of air defenses that could help to shoot some of these down. Actually, we're talking about possibly the north here at the moment, though. At the same time, MiG-31BM fighter, the Black Sea Fleet, took off from the Belbek airfield, whose onboard radar detected 2 tactical aircraft of the Ukrainian Air Force and hit them with guided missiles. So the claim here is that 2 Ukrainian planes were shot by a single MiG-31BM. The exact type of aircraft is unknown, but with a high degree of probability, it is either MiG-29 or Su-27. The effectiveness of both the MiG-31 and S-400 in conjunction with the A-50 is proving increasingly effective. This allows us to hope for a more active fight against Storm Shadow cruise missile carriers, so against the airframes themselves. I don't know what the real claim, the outcome of this was. Is Rebar, are the Russians claiming that no missiles got through and that 2 Ukrainian airframes were hit? I don't know. But the Ukrainians are certainly using missiles, a lot of missiles, to attack Russian targets in Crimea. As you can see here from Rebar, the claim is that air defense took out 3 missiles there and 2 missiles further towards the rigs. But here we have a MiG-31 operating over where the rigs are. And you'd think that's either dangerous or they have, I don't know, eliminated air defenses and troops at the rig. Maybe the oil rigs or the gas rigs don't have Ukrainian troops there anymore. I'm not really sure. Or Rebar's just talking nonsense. All of those are possible. Talking about distant strikes and concerning the Crimean Bridge, here we have a claim by Andrew Yusov, representative of the Internal Affairs and Communications Ministry of Ukraine, saying the Crimean Bridge remains a legitimate military target of the armed forces of Ukraine. Answering the question whether the bridge will be destroyed, the representative said that it is simply unnecessary. He also added that not all Russian supplies go exclusively through the Crimean Bridge. This is something that I've talked about before. So the Kerch Bridge over to the east of Crimea is something that could be hit by the Ukrainians probably now, although there will be undoubtedly some incredibly good air defense systems placed around it because the Russians obviously don't want it to be taken out. It's their kind of pride and joy. I've said before that the Ukrainians probably aren't taking out for a reason. It might provide an off-ramp a literal off-ramp for the Russians within Crimea. If the Russians want to escape, it's kind of Sun Tzu saying that you want to build them a golden bridge. In other words, allow them to escape easily. So it could be that they haven't hit the Kerch Bridge for that reason, because at the moment, I don't think it can take particularly heavy cargo over it, so it's not as strong as it should be given the previous hits and replacement to stretches of the bridge. So as a result of that, it might not be target number 1 really at the moment. So there are other ways, maybe the railway bridge is obviously it is part of that whole setup, but it might be deemed as a different target. And also, they are still using ferries to transfer heavier supplies and equipment across and into Crimea. Interesting that it's deemed at the moment as not a number one target for the Ukrainians. Right, on to other bits and pieces. We're going to talk a little bit, as is my want sometimes, about Elon Musk. So Elon Musk has warned of a World War III risk in a recent Spaces. So Twitter Spaces is like the kind of live video discussions you can have on Twitter. And he opined that there is no anti-Russian insurgency in Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine occupied by Russia. So he's claiming that there's no partisan activity in Zaporizhia, in Luhansk, in Donetsk, in Kherson, in Crimea. Now, I've reported in a year and a half of a huge number of partisan events and activities. We've had assassinations, we've had explosions, we've had ribbons and posters being placed all over the shop. We've had all sorts of stuff going on, and this is just flat out wrong, and he's misinforming his audience again. But the claim is here that he's insinuating that the present lines of control could be made into a ceasefire line or permanent border. In other words, he's kind of saying that everyone who's in the occupied territories wants to be there and they are pro-Russian because there's no partisan activity. I was like, well, A, there is partisan activity, and B, that also doesn't necessarily mean that they want the Russians to be there, and therefore we can just draw the lines there and say, yeah, Russia, you can have that area. This is so Kremlin appeasing again, and it frustrates the heck out of me, as you can probably hear. It's just missing. It's disinformation. Well, is he doing it on purpose? I don't know. I think this is probably misinformation, but it's almost willfully ignorant. So, in answer to this Elon Musk claim, some of the Ukraine's partisans and resistance groups are saying, no, screw you, Elon. We are here. So Yellow Ribbon Resistance Group is trying to prove to Elon Musk that he's wrong. He recently says Tim White, that there's no anti-Russian insurgency in occupied Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine. Somehow he doesn't seem to hear about the attacks on occupiers or see the pictures. Here are just 4 little pictures to say, Elon, we are here in the middle of occupied areas. Elon, we are here. Luhansk is Ukraine. Elon, we are here. Melitopol is Ukraine. Elon, we are here. Makivka is Ukraine. Yellow Ribbon. So not only are there people doing that kind of, just holding up messages to show that they are Ukraine, but to do a little searching and try and find out whether your claims are right first, because I have reported countless events where partisans have blown up things, set fire to relay boxes, done this, done that. Go and do some research, mate. Right, Kiev's council's website has been hacked by Russians, pro-Russians. Acting head Yaroslav Dobryansky wrote, quote, the website looked like a picture of Zelensky with a threatening message. Zelensky, attention, we're already here. Stay tuned for details. The site is now offline. So bit of hacking activity by the Russians there. Anyway, that's all for this first video. Please take care of yourselves, like, subscribe and share, and I'll speak to you soon.